Well, it looks like this was the timeliest start to a Zoom meeting I've ever seen, so I think we should get going.
Great. Well, I want to welcome everybody. I'm so glad you could be here. My name is Lindsay Fomaris, and I'm the chair of the steering committee for the master plan. And we're really happy you could all join us. We feel like we have got really good and helpful and useful presentation tonight. And we're really looking forward to hearing your feedback, getting your input, and learning more from you and what you'd like to see. So I will turn it over to our consultants. Is it Jill? Jill, it's all yours.
Yes, thank you, Lindsay. Hi, my name is Jill Slankus with Barrett Planning Group. We are working with a group of consultants on the Tisbury Master Plan. And we are so happy to be working in Tisbury on the first master plan. And we have a great presentation for tonight and are looking forward to everybody's feedback and input. So I'm going to turn it over to Dylan Sussman and Peter Flinker, who will be doing the bulk of the presentation tonight, focusing on the commercial districts in Tisbury.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Dylan Sussman from Dodson and Flinker. Thank you all for coming. So we're going to start with presentation tonight, and to that end, I'm going to share my screen. All right, it's February 16th, and we're here to talk about commercial districts in Tisbury and visioning alternatives for them. So tonight we're going to spend a little more than half an hour, about 40 minutes on the introductory presentation. And then we're going to have breakout group discussions where you all will be able to talk to each other and give feedback on what we shared during the presentation. And then we'll come back together and hear some report out from your facilitators, and then wind up with a poll question at the end. That's the plan for tonight, and hopefully it'll go according to plan. We want to thank the Master Plan Steering Committee members and also the Planning Board members who've made this project possible. They're all working hard for your town and are wonderful, thoughtful people. And we also want to thank Dan Doyle, who's the project sort of manager for the town, who's out of the Martha's Vineyard Commission and has been just a great local resource for us and done all sorts of wonderful, useful things. For the consulting team on this project, we have 5 firms. We just added FXM Associates, who was originally in the proposal for the project, but due to budget issues, sort of dropped out, had to be removed. But recently have been added back in, which is really useful because economic development is a key part of master plan, and it's especially a key part of these commercial district visions that we're working on. So the team is led by Barrett Planning Group. You just heard from Jill, who's from Barrett Planning Group. They're handling the overall project, community engagement, land use, housing, governance, and final plan for the project. Horsley Witten Group, who is not with us tonight, are working on natural resources, energy sustainability, and community health. And then Beta Group are working on public facilities and transportation. And then from Dodson and Flinker with us tonight, we have myself, Peter Flinker, who you'll hear from in presentation, and Jack Sweeney Taylor, who will be facilitating. And we're working just on these commercial area vision plans. So the project will go until about September of this year. And so we're about halfway through. And right now we're in sort of what is called the focusing period in the quarter. So there's a draft of the existing conditions plan that the steering committee has reviewed, and there are revisions being made to it. The team is working on key issues. And then at this point for the commercial district visioning, which is a little bit on its own timeline, we're at the stage where we had some workshops in October, heard from people in the community, and based on that, we've developed some alternatives for you to look at tonight. So you may be wondering what a commercial district vision is. So the idea here is that in order for the town to know what kinds of decisions to make for your commercial districts, you need to know where you want them to head in the sort of big picture and the long term. So this part of the project is to develop that picture, both literally in drawings and also in words, so that the town can have a common understanding of its future vision for the districts. And then flowing from that, the town can take a number of steps. They can change regulations, they can improve infrastructure, and they can also take a leadership role, both with outside bodies like Mass Department of Transportation or the Steamship Authority, or working with nonprofit organizations or working with property owners to make sure that everybody is heading toward the same long-term idea of what these areas should be. This was a key part of the project, I think, led in part by the planning board. I think it's part of the project recognizing that these areas are really consequential for the town. They're economic hubs, they're transportation hubs, and a lot of the sort of the key issues that the master plan is exploring really hit the ground in these areas. So there's a lot going on in the commercial districts, and some key opportunities and challenges for the town. So when I say commercial districts, we're looking at three districts and two areas. So in your Vineyard Haven area, there's the downtown B1 zoning district, and then there's the waterfront commercial district, which is running along Beach Road and Lagoon Pond Road. So it's basically, Main Street and then the waterfront. And then the third commercial district is the State Road or B2 district, which is, where Kronig's is and SBS and so forth. So as you can see, they're two very different areas with different opportunities and constraints, and we'll get into those in a minute. But these are your three commercial districts in your town. So if somebody wants to establish a business in Tisbury, these are the places they're being steered towards through zoning. So as I mentioned earlier, we had some workshops back in October. There was a series of workshops over the course of Friday afternoon and Friday evening and then Saturday morning. We did some great walking tours of both downtown and the waterfront area, and also the B2. Heard from a great group of people who told us all about what was working and not working in those areas, and got to see things, at a really fine level of detail. On Friday night, we broke out maps and people talked about transportation and the environment and business and housing and design and placemaking. And then on Saturday morning, we tried to move more into what people want these areas to be like. The key takeaways that we heard from those October workshops with regard to the downtown and the waterfront related to sea level rise and flooding that was identified at the end of the workshop as kind of the highest priority thing to take a look at for the downtown and the waterfront. So issues like protecting Beach Road and access to the hospital, improving stormwater management, considering daylighting Bass Creek was an idea that came up during the workshop. And then another topic of conversation was housing and infrastructure. And obviously the Vineyard as a whole has an affordable housing problem. And when I say affordable, I mean for a broad range of incomes, with a median household income of median household price of, I believe it's close to $1 million. There are quite a few people who are having trouble affording housing, and that has impacts across your community, right? Like both on the personal level and then also on the economic level, since it affects the ability of businesses to get employees. So wastewater and sewer is closely tied to the ability to develop housing. On the circulation side, we heard the need for improved pedestrian connections, the need for improved bicycle connections, and bike safety, and a sense that in downtown, the area is somewhat not legible for new visitors to Vineyard Haven. We also talked about the waterfront, we talked about placemaking, and we talked about some key opportunity areas like Stop and Shop and the town police area and the town parking next to Stop and Shop, Five Corners, post office, and the waterfront. In the B2 district, give me just a second here. In the B2 district, the key topics there were about what kinds of businesses belong in the B2. It's got a unique mix of different kinds of businesses, some of which are compatible and some of which are not. So what's the best use of businesses going forward? There's a lot of conversation about circulation due to the way that the B2 basically developed along State Road, and then with sort of little stubs that come off of it, but very little connection between properties or to the back off of State Road. Again, housing and infrastructure are key questions in this area, as is placemaking. So how do you make State Road more appealing and attractive? How do you make the areas to the back of State Road more appealing and attractive? How do you ensure that there's compatibility between the businesses and the abutting residential areas? And then, a big topic of conversation in the workshop was the idea of a connector road between State Road and Edgartown Vineyard Haven Road, which is an idea that has been has a history in Vineyard Haven. It was brought up to a vote a number of years ago and narrowly didn't pass, but there was a lot of conversation in this workshop about whether that idea should be brought forward again. So the big ideas coming out of the workshop are basically to make it easier to move around in the districts and also to connect them, to protect the environment and to build resilience, to balance the needs of year-round residents, visitors in the island. And that one's really key, right? Because both of these areas have a lot of different users and they're meeting a lot of different needs. So the really key question of who do you prioritize if you have to make a choice? So how do you expand housing for year-round residents? And are these places appropriate for that? How do you enable businesses to adapt and thrive? And then finally, enhancing community spaces and sense of place is another big idea to come out of the workshop. So I'm going to look at the State Road area. We're going to look at the State Road area now and sort of just step through some of its component parts, some of the systems that make it up. So the orange outline here is the zoning district boundary. You can see State Road toward the top of the image, High Point Lane, which goes back to the park and ride lot. There's a complex of town-owned land in the back there. And then Kronig's is up toward the top of the image or the north. And I don't know how many of you have experience in this, getting off of State Road in this area, but as you can see in the aerial photo, there's quite a lot of structures back here, quite a lot of businesses. And so this is looking just at buildings in gray. And you can see that buildings come in a variety of different sizes here, from the original houses that were along State Road, which are relatively small size, to Kronig's, very large supermarket, as well as some larger commercial structures and some shopping plazas with multiple tenants within them. Looking at the open space and town-owned land here, you can see that around the north of the area. There's Tisbury Waterworks land. There's also a well protection area down to the south off of Sanborn Lane. There's a solar field on the former landfill, the park and ride lot, and then Tisbury DPW land. So those are sort of, that land is kind of ringing the district, right? Which provides an opportunity for open space connections potentially in the future. And there already are some trails running through those areas. This map is color coded by land use. So we looked really closely at what the different kinds of businesses are in this area, as well as the housing. So in yellow, in the lighter yellow, you see single family houses. There are a few of those in the upper right of the image. There also are multifamily houses on the edges as well, mostly on the edges of the district. Along State Road in the sort of salmon red color are commercials, general commercial uses like retail, office, services, etc. And then in the purple shades are more intense commercial uses, sort of tending towards light industrial. So you have auto repair places, you have contractor yards, you have storage and distribution kind of uses. And so that, you know, there is a pattern here, which is that the commercial and public facing commercial uses like retail are lining up generally along the road, right? They're in the places where you have visibility, where your customers can see you. And then generally toward the back, there are more industrial and less public facing uses. And in particular, there's a cluster of those uses in the southeast portion of the district. So we look at which parcels, you know, which areas of this may have potential for changes in the future. We're not saying they should have changes. We're not saying they will have changes. We're just saying that there are some areas that are, you know, generally they're open, they don't have buildings on them, or they're a use that seems like it possibly could change in the future. So the biggest of these is the Goodale construction yard, which is sort of down in a pit below the park and ride lot. And then there are some other areas scattered throughout the district where there are spaces that are free of buildings or parcels that are vacant. So these are potential opportunities for change in the district. And a key question is, how should they change? And does the town want to take a role in steering them in one way or not, another, or do they not want to take a role in that? And then more broadly, if there are changes that are desired by the town, are there other things that need to happen to make that feasible? So, for example, are there transportation improvements that are needed, or are there other infrastructure changes that are needed, like wastewater treatment capacity or something like that? This is looking at the circulation system. So roads and sidewalks. The roads are in black and sidewalks are shown in green. So there's a continuous sidewalk that runs up from Vineyard Haven, as you probably know, on one side of the street. And then just a small segment of sidewalk runs from about Kroenig's to about SBS. There's a network of trails, as I mentioned before. Those are shown in this dashed green line. So they, for example, running from Eggertown Road along Mud Puddle Road and then connecting over to the back of the solar fields. So there's, and then there are these little short roads that run to the commercial properties, which are a mix of actual roads and basically shared driveways or easements. But as you can see, there's one main spine, and that's State Road. And, you know, no connection from here to Eggertown Road, and very little connection to the backs of the properties. These are potential roads, potential connections that could be made, very conceptual, right? And there's a number of ways that those could be made. It could be the town taking an active role in building things, or it could be the town taking a leadership role, or it could be private landowners choosing to make connections across property lines to make their operations more smooth and efficient. And shown here is the previous concept for the connector road, which has comes off of Eggertown Road and then splits off into a number of different branches with the idea of creating multiple access and egress points onto State Road to spread traffic when it reaches there. Same circulation pattern, but showing the opportunity areas. So you can see that if you were to redevelop some of these opportunity areas, it presents the opportunity to make circulation improvements, or to give you access to redevelop some of these opportunity parcels. Peter, you're up.
Well, thanks, Dylan. Yeah, so there's a lot of opportunity in this area, and we've been asked to sort of help develop a vision for the future. And one of the things we realized is that there's a lot of stuff going on here that's kind of overlapping uses, some of which are mutually supporting, some of which are not. And the question is, which direction should this area go in the future? Should it become, as it says here, more of the sort of year-round service center for the island? Should it become more of its own village? We don't really know the answer to that yet, but we thought to help sort of clarify the alternatives and spur discussion tonight, we develop, in this case, 3 different directions for the State Road District to go in. And I must emphasize, they're realistic, they could happen, but they're imaginary, right? The purpose of them is to think about what would happen if you push it in one direction and let nature take its course and sort of think about what happens. So it's kind of a thought experiment in that way. We want to emphasize that these visions and the ultimate vision that come out of this process is not going to force anybody to do anything with their land. Everyone will continue to have what they have and do what they do as controlled by zoning until if and when zoning and other regulations change or public investment is made that will spur some kind of change. But again, the purpose of this visioning process is to help you all and help us imagine what is possible for the future and think about, would that be better? And if so, how could we get there? So this is the first of 3 alternatives for the State Road District. So the different colors you see sort of represent future land uses. In this case, this area would continue to serve as the year-round sort of service district for the island, focusing on the kind of things which are pretty heavily in use right now. So automobile service, service to contractors, the contractors' yards, material supply, a place where you can go and get stuff you need for your home, where your contractors get stuff to do things, the things where you go and look at tile and pick out electrical fixtures or go to the store and get your groceries and so on. All of that is here now. And so in this scenario, that is sort of enhanced and allowed to continue. So the commercial district and uses would remain along State Road. That area behind State Road, particularly to the south, would continue to serve light industrial and storage and distribution uses, but with a better organization around a new interior spine that would allow a kind of travel back and forth parallel to State Road without having to pull out onto State Road itself, which seems like a very doable approach and one that would solve a lot of issues, both on the sort of southeast side of State Road and also to the north behind Kronig's Market, sort of linking up those parcels so people could get back and forth without having to get back onto State Road. There's also the possibility of some town uses here expanding. There's the existing DPW and the water tanks and the other uses. But one of the things which people have pointed out in the workshops is maybe this would be a good place for an expanded town office, or maybe even moving the town hall or having a larger annex and meeting place. And that we're sort of locating possibly on High Point Lane there, sort of next to a new park that would take advantage of the existing open space that's part of the bank property. There's a small bank facility. And then around the edges, this scenario could include housing on a number of parcels. And then the continued open space would sort of serve, existing open space would serve as the sort of containment for this future center. The second scenario talks about really focusing this as a second village center for Tisbury. So in addition to serving, continuing to serve some of the island-wide uses, it would really focus on a place where businesses, perhaps relocating from the floodplain in downtown Vineyard Haven along the waterfront, could move and find a place to relocate, with an emphasis also on housing. That could be shops or apartments above the shops, and also housing around the outskirts as shown in the yellow. So that mixed use color really represents a mix of sort of live, work, and play, right? It's residential, probably on the upper floors or in the back of the parcel, commercial and retail uses, particularly on the lower floors and facing State Road, and then continued office, and could include some light industrial uses as well. But the sort of heavier commercial uses, like the Goodale contractor yard pit and the auto uses, could remain, but would be a smaller part of the overall district, which is shown in the sort of purple. An important way that this works is to provide parking that is not as individual parcels as it is now, but is really consolidated in shared parking lots within the center of each of these new blocks. So to the extent possible, we would, at a minimum, link up the existing parking lots to the rear of buildings, again, so people wouldn't have to pull that onto State Road, but hopefully also to consolidate that. So rather than having a very inefficient parking pattern of buildings, parking right next to the building, a little bit of open space, another parking lot, and so on, you could have buildings sort of set within continuous open space along the street, and all the parking would be consolidated to the rear. A very common kind of approach to trying to make a former commercial strip more walkable and more attractive and easier to get around in lots of ways. So the final scenario is what we're calling a sort of place for everything, which is kind of a mix of the different things. So it'd be pushing it more toward mixed use, walkability, with, again, shops on the ground floor and apartments above them, but in a smaller area, pretty much from High Point Lane to the north, to the east. And then commercial uses would continue, sort of continuing to serve a lot of the uses that and customers that they do today, but within better circulation pattern that would include that idea of central parking lots set back from State Road, and opening up more frontage along State Road itself for more active buildings and pedestrian space. And then it would have a continued light industrial use, and then room for housing, again, on the parcels that are around the outskirts, as well as over some of those shops. So in this case, all of these scenarios could include the connecting roads, which are shown dashed in going over to Edgartown Road. We think that makes a lot of sense in terms of bringing traffic off of State Road and not making everybody go all the way around the corner. It also would make the internal circulation work a little bit better. So we have a couple of slides that sort of show what this look like as it would play out. So this is the existing conditions. You can see the larger park and ride and the large Goodale pit. And you note the point where High Point Lane comes down to State Road. And then what we've done is sort of show how this might evolve over the next, 20 years, say. So it's sort of work in progress, literally. So this is showing that new interior parallel road going all the way across, not between High Point Lane and then running north and south to connect to the existing roads. And what this does is allow everybody to get back and forth, and to the extent possible, close off the unnecessary curb cuts along State Road itself, and then have circulation in the back. I think if we zoom in, the next slide sort of shows how that would connect a number of different blocks. And then once you have this overall circulation in place, sort of connecting existing roads, whether public or private, with this crossroads, uses can evolve and change within each of these different blocks as needed in the future. But the blocks themselves become a kind of permanent framework where you have streets that you can drive on, but also streets that you can walk on with good sidewalks, street trees, and so on. So this is kind of classic way that towns and villages have been designed for hundreds of years, right? It works very well, even while different businesses and uses come and go. So if we go to the next slide, I think we zoom in on kind of the core of this walkable village along State Road. The gray buildings are existing buildings. So this is really keeping the lion's share of existing buildings in place and showing how they could be supplemented, or in this case, expanded with new buildings and expansions of existing buildings. So that those are shown in brown. So a lot of people pointed out how the existing sort of the so-called streetscape along State Road is pretty nice. There's sort of a nice scale of almost cottage buildings there. There's a lot of big trees and lawns, and people don't really want that to change. And so in this scenario, we're showing how those buildings could be expanded a little bit to provide for new uses, which is enabled by closing off those unnecessary driveways and curb cuts and having all the circulation in the back off of the side streets. So we've consolidated the individual parking into larger central lots. We're connecting those to the side streets. And what that does is allow both a much nicer pedestrian district along the street, but also opens up opportunities for each of those businesses and landowners to add on to their buildings. So in the end, what you get is sort of continuous pedestrian districts, consolidated parking, and a lot of room to plant trees, which are the little green blobs. And again, once you get that sort of structure in place, the streets are in place with the sidewalks and the trees are growing happily. If uses need to change, in 20 or 30 or 50 years, they can do so. We'll go to the next slide. Another idea people raised was to create some kind of a town center complex, perhaps a town hall, again, facing that existing green space, could be parking next to it and behind it. And that might be shared with a new apartment complex that would take some of the space in the Goodale pit. And a number of people pointed out, yeah, we'd really need a lot of housing, but we don't want to look at big buildings from State Road. So this is sort of experimenting with the idea of having maintaining the smaller structures along State Road itself, but maybe having the larger apartment buildings that we know are going to be the most inexpensive way to create apartments and therefore more affordable, whether the market rate or not. Have those larger apartments back away from the street in a place which is already disturbed. So this is kind of experimenting with that idea. In this case, each of those blocks could easily contain 25 or 30 apartments. So there's lots of space there. I mean, just what's shown there could be 100 new, affordable or market rate apartments with a new street that would help people move around and connected to pedestrian system, et cetera. I think the last image shows, sort of zooming in on the Holmeshold Road, State Road corner, the so-called Knobnocket property, which is kind of a rolling hillside. And so one of the things I was experimenting with is putting maybe a townhouse kind of development there, where the townhouse is sort of set parallel to the slope, with the parking set in between and kind of courtyards. So it's probably not a place where it's easy to build large apartments, but the smaller connected apartments, and these could be designed to look like kind of traditional large house that you have out here, and sort of set behind protected screen of trees and so on. So we're interested to hear your reaction to some of these ideas, and we're going to talk about those in a few minutes when we break into smaller groups. I think next, Dylan is going to introduce the downtown and waterfront districts.
Yeah, so you're familiar, I'm sure, with downtown and the waterfront. Just to orient you to the map, this is Main Street running up, and then Beach Road along the water, and Lagoon Pond Road running down. So looking at the sort of nonprofit and government uses in this area, you have the War Veterans Memorial Park, the post office, the town parking and police, more town parking off Union Street, Owen Park, and then some additional open spaces and cemetery. So, you know, there are some large parcels of town-owned land, as well as the steamship authority. They're really essential to this area. In terms of open space, these are color-coded by different types of open spaces. So the ones that are showing up in green and like a darker green are parks and true public open spaces. Then the ones that have a yellow overlay on them are open spaces that are private. So Bach Park being a key example of that. It's basically a park for private use. And then there's the opposite, which are private spaces that are publicly accessible to some degree. So the small parks, pocket parks along Main Street, like Linden Tree Park, or the space in front of the next to the Capewalk, are examples of those privately owned public spaces. So it's an interesting mix of public spaces in your downtown and your waterfront, between the very large and the very small, and each of those has its own unique role to play. Then the final category on this map are places that are public open space, but it's not quite clear, if you're somebody who's not familiar with Vineyard Haven, whether they're actually public and accessible or not. So the beachfront along the steamship, or the little stretch of beach at the end of Beach Street Extension, or the little beach access next to the bus loop adjacent to the Steamship Authority. This is an idea for additional open space or connections to open space. So, you know, making it clear that the public spaces that are public are truly public, so that everybody knows that they can go to them. The idea of connecting, putting a greenway along the former bed of Bass Creek that would connect from, you know, near the lagoon to up to Lagoon Pond Road, and then making better use of and making it more accessible, the open space that's just south of the Tisbury Marketplace. And then the long and very controversial idea of having more formalized public access of some sort along the waterfront, south of Beach Street Extension, which, you know, could take a variety of forms, a variety of types of ownership or access, and a variety of different paths. So maybe it's some of this stretch, maybe it's none of this stretch. And, you know, we talked about this topic in the workshop, and I understand it's been discussed for a long time. And some people want to continue to move forward with that idea, and other people feel like it's, you know, not going to come to fruition and it's time to move on. So that's a kind of key question for the town to consider moving forward, is what to invest time in and what to move on from. Looking at the existing circulation system, there's a pretty good sidewalk network in Vineyard Haven, with many streets with sidewalks on both sides and some with sidewalks on just one side. This also is showing you in the little dashes crosswalks or pedestrian paths. And then in blue, we have bike infrastructure. So for example, the sort of bike route that's a shared road along Causeway Road from Skiff Ave. The shared use path that runs through Veterans Fields and up to Beach Road, or Beach Street. And then the new bike lanes on Beach Road. And then looking at how you could possibly connect some of that circulation. This is sort of like a maximum pedestrian circulation concept. So all these little dashed lines are new pedestrian connections. And then expanding the shared use path along Lagoon Pond Road and through the middle of the Lagoon Pond and Beach Road triangle. So some of this is kind of underway with a safe harbor redevelopment. So the idea is to connect through that over to the Tisbury Marketplace and to Beach Road so that people can bypass Five Corners, or they can come down Skiff Ave over to Causeway Road and then get out to Beach Road safely and then access your downtown if they're coming from Up Island. Looking at the uses in the downtown and waterfront area, it's very complicated mixed pattern here. So along Main Street, you have a lot of mixed use buildings. There's some mixed use and some housing along Lagoon Pond Road. And then there are the sort of true, waterfront industrial uses shown in purple, which are mostly along Beach Road, as well as we're putting the new, the marina, former Maciel Marina, now Safe Harbor on Lagoon Pond Road in that category as well. And then there are the, public or government and quasi-government uses, the town parking lot and the steamship authority and the post office. So, a key question moving forward is, does this mix of uses make sense? Is there any benefit from trying to organize those uses a little bit more? Which ones does the town want to prioritize moving forward? And so forth. As I mentioned before, the climate change got a lot of attention in the October workshop with, in particular, sea level rise. So this is a map showing the projected sea level rise for downtown Vineyard Haven. The red colors, the red is the 1 foot of sea level rise. These areas will be the mean higher water will cover these areas. And then as you move towards, orange, that's 3 feet of sea level rise, 4 feet of sea level rise in a lighter orange, and then 6 feet, 7 feet, 8 feet through 10 feet in sort of yellows and greens. The Martha's Vineyard Commission's recommended model for this indicate that there'll be about 1.5 feet of sea level rise by 2050. So again, those are the red tones. So there's the water lapping up the edges of some of the shorelines and potentially crossing Beach Road. At 3.5 feet, you're talking about these orange tones along Beach Road, Water Street, Five Corners, and so forth. So that's what, 50 years in the future. So the master plan maybe has the lifespan of 10 or 20 years, but you want to start considering sort of long planning horizons and have plans for multiple timelines. What you're going to do in the next 10 years, what you're going to do in the next 20 years, and what you might want to do in 50 or 70 years. You're probably not taking actions. Maybe you're not taking actions for 50 or 70 year timeline right now, but you might want to not make large investments. You wouldn't want to make a 100-year investment now in an area that might not be there, that might be vastly different in 50 or 70 years. This is looking at the 2030 expected 1% floodplain, and that's all of that in yellow. And then the 2% or the 2050 1% floodplain extends just a little bit further. That's because you've got slopes there, so the water doesn't cover that much more ground. but it will get deeper. So combining those two things, the blue is showing you the estimated chance of flooding, the 1% floodplain in 2030, and the uses. And so you can see that Main Street is out of that floodplain. But most of Water Street, Stop and Shop, Police Station, Lagoon Pond Road and Beach Road are all within that 1% floodplain. So the question is, do some uses make more sense in the floodplain than others? Do some improvements make more sense in the floodplain than others? So I think our conclusion from this is that the most important area to figure out from the perspective of these commercial district visions is that waterfront and commercial district, as well as the portion of the B1 district that's also within the floodplain. Back to you, Peter.
So I think in our analysis and discussions with participants in the project, there's some baseline improvements that make a lot of sense regardless. I mean, one is obviously to optimize the functions of the downtown and the waterfront to serve everyone on the island, to make it easier to get into and around Vineyard Haven by all means, to encourage businesses that provide year-round goods and services and stable jobs, regardless of what industry they're in, to address congestion at the five corners and Beach Road and State Road and the intersection of Edgartown Road and State Road, to address stormwater flooding at Five Corners and Water Street, and to protect key local infrastructure, including all those roads and intersections from sea level rise. Particularly, people have expressed a lot of concern about maintaining access both to the ferry and to the hospital. So beyond that, there's a lot of opportunities to do many different things. And again, we've developed, I think, two scenarios, just again as kind of trial balloons, if you'll forgive the expression, which you can shoot down or not. But really to get the conversation going tonight and after this meeting about, which direction do we want to go with the downtown and waterfront? Does it matter that we have to set a direction, or can we do everything at once? And is there a sweet spot? Are there certain things that will enhance any activity in this area that maybe this will help reveal? So this diagram shows a sort of vision for a maritime center that continues a focus on sort of maritime services and a working waterfront. So the purple, which includes the existing waterfront dependent uses and the safe harbor marina on the lagoon, would continue to take up a fair amount of that triangle between Lagoon Pond Road and Beach Road. The Tisbury Marketplace would continue to be there, but there's an opportunity where the new the Vineyard Wind facility is going in on Beach Road. They're not taking up all that site. So the question is what else to do with the former lumberyard property. And there's a fair amount of space behind the adjoining businesses. And so the idea would be to really set that aside for existing and future waterfront dependent uses. The sort of existing mixed residential district along Lagoon Pond Road would continue to serve as a place for small businesses and residential uses, but really with a focus on mixed use that would combine both those things and perhaps have new residential buildings, perhaps raised up as needed to get out of the floodplain, and then perhaps to have floodable waterfront dependent uses on the ground floor. And then housing would continue in that area as well. And then we're thinking that the post office site at the corner of Lagoon Pond Road and Beach Street maybe could be a site for if the post office were to move to State Road or somewhere else, could be a large parking lot that would serve both the waterfront district as well as the downtown. And then the downtown itself would continue to serve the functions it has now for mixed use, but again with a focus on a sort of year-round businesses, year-round jobs, and so on, and then a continued sort of commercial presence there in the block intervening. One thing you'll notice with this one is there's an opportunity for the sort of waterfront focus to have a lot of the connectivity improvements for walking and biking as the other scenarios. So this could include some kind of connected greenway, both along the sort of Veterans Field side as well as on the waterfront side, connecting up to Owen Park. The next scenario shows another vision, which people have been pretty excited about and talked about in the different workshops, which is really emphasizing Vineyard Haven's role in sort of becoming an arts and culture center. So building on that history of wonderful places to look for arts, to find a meal, but also building on the heritage of the waterfront more intentionally by maybe expanding the boatyard activities of wooden boat construction and repair as really its own kind of waterfront heritage district, maybe with partnerships with the Vineyard Museum and more educational programs and so on, as well as interpretive activities, and most importantly, continuing and expanding the Gannon and Benjamin boatyard, if that's possible, and other related uses to really make that a focus of bringing together the active waterfront, the history of the community, as well as this wonderful sort of cultural opportunity. I think the area of, I think one of the ways this differs from the sort of waterfront focus, sort of waterfront industrial focus, is in the area between Lagoon Pond Road and Beach Road. So there would continue to be the location where they're building the new Vineyard Wind headquarters, but behind that, rather than focusing on places to store boats and materials, is to create a large public parking lot that could serve again that whole district. And that district itself could become more focused on sort of arts and artisan related housing, shop space, galleries, and workshops. And then perhaps on the corner of Lagoon Pond Road, where the post office is, to rebuild the post office as a sort of taller building that would help to shape that corner, but then build new parking below it and behind it that could serve again this whole district as well as the existing downtown. And then throughout, there would be a focus on connecting the parks into kind of a donut of park space that would circle the whole downtown with paths that would allow you to walk all the way around, as well as an enhanced system of pedestrian paths in the intervening blocks, including that idea of a greenway, perhaps with daylighting the Bass Creek that used to go in the triangle, and making that a place where you could walk all the way from the lagoon, where you might have a new park, to the downtown. And we have some diagrams of this. This is existing conditions, and the next one shows an overlay. We're going to zoom in on this a little bit. But again, this is kind of an imaginary exploration of what's possible. If you zoom in the next slide, we can look at the downtown area, and there's a lot going on here. But the big idea is, again, the gray buildings are existing. The brown are potential future buildings. In the center, of course, the likely candidate, unless it goes somewhere else, is the rebuilt Stop and Shop, which this is based on their plan from 10 years ago, which probably won't take that form exactly as they're rethinking what it could be, but in the same location. You can see that large building also on the post office site, just below that on this image. And you can see the idea, again, is to have a building that sort of shapes that corner. So it's a nice sort of pedestrian street with a building that encloses the street, and then a large parking lot behind it that could extend underneath the building as well. And that pink sort of crosshatched tone is kind of a symbol for pedestrian space. So a big idea, which a lot of you have been working on for many years, is to really make it comfortable and continuous in terms of a place for people to walk, to open up stores on the back as well as on the front, so that there's more opportunities, and to really make everything work as a continuous system. So that includes the existing Union Street Mall that goes south from Union Street, but really extending that south then down the, what's that, the Caldwell, Cranwell? Cromwell. Sorry, the Cromwell Lane. And then the sort of east and west connection on Norton Street would also be pedestrian focus. And so the idea is, I mean, right now, both Cromwell and Norton are kind of driveways or small lanes that you can walk on if you're careful. The idea they would continue to be what you could drive on, but it's really flipping that idea to saying these are pedestrian spaces that you can drive through, as opposed to driving spaces that you can walk through. And it's a lot of places have been doing that. It sort of started in Europe, of course, but the idea is, to make it primarily a space for people. And if you need to drive through to get to a parking lot or to make a delivery, you can. And just approaching every space like that really opens up a lot of possibilities. For example, along Cromwell Lane here, we're showing a number of small structures that could be built on top of the parking lots. You could park in them, but on certain days of the week or summer fairs and so on, they could be permanent stalls for galleries and so on that would line and help to sort of make that space more comfortable. We've also shown here a number of ideas that have been talked about a long time: improvements to the ferry landing, which might involve new places for the bus to pull around and to park, and possible changes to the main town parking lot next to the Stop and Shop. This is only one of a number of examples, but it seems like if Stop and Shop is going to be recreating that area, it really provides an opportunity for them to help support redesign of that, again, as a multi-use space. So you could park in it most of the time, but also design it so that it can be used for other uses on the weekend or for a summer festival and so on. And that really connects to all the smaller spaces in between buildings, both in that block and then also along Main Street. And I think, the one other idea we were thinking about is where the Hertz dealership
Hertz rental
is on the corner. Right now, there's a parking lot, but the opportunity to keep the parking lot, but put it in the back with maybe a new building that would face the ferry landing. So as you come in, instead of seeing just parked cars and a big hedge that's overhanging the sidewalk, make a wider sidewalk, a beautiful new mixed-use building, have the parking behind, and then invite people to sort of walk up Union Street to Main Street. So this is by far not the final vision for the downtown, but I hope you can see that it starts to show how, if we think comprehensively about connecting all these spaces, if we think about these as flexible spaces that could be used by pedestrians most of the time, but also by cars when they need to, rather than the other way around, it opens up lots of possibilities for the downtown. And I think the next slide shows that area to the south, sort of the triangle in between Lagoon Pond Road and Beach Road. And in this case, we're really thinking about the opportunity to connect maybe a wonderful public park that is along the lagoon, where there is a private park that's part of the marketplace property, which in really turning that, maybe that's an art park that you can walk to as part of the experience of the culture of Vineyard Haven. And the way you get there is by a new greenway that would follow perhaps the former or resurrected line of Bass Creek coming up the center there, where somewhere there's probably still, we believe there's still a pipe that's serving some drainage activity. And then this would incorporate the new bike path that's coming through War Veterans Memorial Park, and there's an existing easement that has just been part of an agreement as part of the expansion for the marina that provides an opportunity for the trail to come around and then go through along the lagoon and out to Beach Road. And then again, that large brown building in the center is the approved plan for the Vineyard Wind headquarters, But behind that, there's an opportunity to take space that is kind of underutilized and turn that into a large parking lot that could serve, again, both this whole district, as well as providing a place to people to get out of their cars as they come in from Oak Bluffs, and then get on this pedestrian system and walk to the downtown instead of driving up and clogging things up. And the last thing I want to mention, because we do want to give you a chance to talk, is a similar approach for Beach Street extension. So not really changing the layout very much, but changing the surface perhaps, and changing the use, again, to focus on a pedestrian space, a wonderful sort of town square overlooking the water that you can park in when you need to, most of the week and off season, but which would be easy to turn into a wonderful outdoor festival space, cafe space for the adjoining restaurants, a place for musical events, all kinds of things. And again, this is, a tradition that's centuries old in every European city, where the town square is full of cars part of the week and then is a wonderful pedestrian space on the weekend. And it's increasingly done to bring life and a sense of place to communities in America. So we're very interested. Do we have any more of these to talk about, Dylan? Right, we put this last one in because, we don't want to forget the alternative. All of these ideas of arts and culture are very attractive, but not necessarily the only approach. And so we do want to talk about and get your opinion on the idea of really continuing the focus on the waterfront uses, which again, probably wouldn't involve a large public parking lot because these uses have their own parking, but it could involve some of these connections with pedestrian connectivity, as well as perhaps better road connectivity, and the kind of idea I was talking about for State Road of connecting the parking lots so everybody doesn't have to pull out onto Beach Road to get back and forth. So this is kind of the framework we hope for a lively discussion we want to have for the next hour with you. I think that's all the slides, right, Dylan?
That's it.
And you're going to help us get our way to the small group discussions.
Yeah, so we're going to break out into small groups. We're going to have about 40 minutes for small group discussion and then come back together briefly at the end. During the small group discussions, we'd love for you to speak one at a time so everybody can be heard. Try to focus on conversation, not debate, and try to, make sure you're understanding each other and understanding your underlying interests and goals. So Catherine, if you're ready, could you send us to breakout groups? Hello, everybody. So we're all back together. Typically, at this point in the meeting, we do what we call a report out, where the facilitators tell you what they heard in each of their groups. Tonight, I would prefer not to do that. We only have 15 minutes left, and we talked a lot in the beginning of the meeting, so I'd like to continue to hear from those of you who attended the meeting. And we're going to take meeting notes so you can read up on what other groups heard. So I'm wondering if anybody is bold enough to speak to the whole group here of the 36 of us who are left, and tell us sort of your big takeaways from tonight. Maybe it's something that you found exciting, or maybe it's something that you found off-putting. Although exciting is definitely more interesting to us, I think. We want to know what to move forward with, what's most important. So I see some hands up. Morgan Schroeder, it looks like you have a hand up.
Yeah, I was gonna say our group discussed a lot about how there are so many opportunities to make Vineyard Haven very welcoming. It's the year-round island town. It's the port of call. There's tons of opportunities within the harbor to encourage more water traffic there as well. Something that I liked that our group talked about was addressing housing opportunities for the aging population. So we were pretty in support of mixed use or some larger apartment complexes in the State Road area. And that would potentially open up, create better opportunities for the housing stock on the island as well, if older folks are wanting to downsize. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Mac, I see you had your hand up.
Yeah, just some big takeaways. I mentioned, I think that the village of Vineyard Haven has the most economic opportunity of any kind of under place. This is a really big undertaking. I think making that space green, not green, but creating more opportunity to walk through, especially the Norton Path, and creating a third throughway between Main Street and Water Street, you know, by the boat there, I think is incredible. I think as we keep an eye on this, I keep saying this, but there was a fire in 1890, which really knocked out a lot of the historic buildings in downtown. The town never quite recovered. And Edgartown's done a great job of capitalizing on their historic nature, but in terms of history, we have just as much. We were founded the same year in 1671, and I think that around town we should include little plaques, little things to make people feel more connected to the historical nature. One thing that I think has been neglected is there is I think that really the Five Corners issue needs to be handled with eminent domain or whatnot, but the beach road extension really needs to be taken care of in terms of the outflow pipe with the master plan. Thanks.
Rachel? Yep, you're muted. You're muted, Rachel. There you go.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize I had to do it myself. Sorry. I was really excited to see the connectivity that was being made in the B2 district. I loved the idea that they were looking to take the traffic off State Road and lessen the congestion in that area and make accessibility behind the businesses and really expand on, you know, a walking, more inclusive community in that area. And I love the fact that it was really utilizing the pre-existing spaces, the pre-existing uses of the businesses, but adding in and connecting them with pre-existing right-of-ways and using some of the open spaces to redevelop and offer more housing. And I hope that, you know, those are things that could happen. Housing was a key element that really piqued my interest in that area. And I thought I really liked the idea of creating it more of a community space that felt like a second place to spend your time in and take the stress off of downtown Vineyard Haven so much, because the traffic is really challenging. And I just thought it was really nice to be able to kind of ease that in many areas, with even the connection to Edgartown Road, and really giving the opportunity to just sort of lessen the burden on that State Road corridor. I also really appreciated the use of green spaces and opening up connectivity throughout the town while continuing to use the pre-existing structure and layout without having to do too much disruption to what we already have available to us to work with.
Thank you. Anybody else want to share with the group? Carolyn? Carolyn, let me see if I can unmute you, but I think you are muted.
I unmuted. Okay. I think that about covers a lot of what I was thinking too. But I think there's so much to be done, and it really is hard to focus on what is the important thing for the town. And I think you've given us such great ideas to think about, but I think we need time to process it and just see, you know, our next meeting, I think, will be great. I love the idea in our discussions about connecting the history of the harbor with the museum. I think that would be a great thing to happen. And that's something that we can do. And of course, I love the idea of more green space and walking areas, and because I live in Vineyard Haven all year round, and those kind of things are really important to me. And apparently another group talked about elderly housing, which is a great thing to think about also. I think we really need that. That's all I have to say. Until next time.
Thank you, and I'm sorry I got your name wrong again.
Oh, that's okay.
So I'm going to try with Carolina.
Yeah, Caroline.
No,
Well,
you're
I'm
Caroline, but
Carolina.
I'm calling on
I'm-
Carolina.
And I am Carolina, so you got that one right. Thank you. I think one thing that we all were actually in agreement about, which was kind of surprising, was that we think the post office would be good to have moved up into the B2 district.
Mhm.
Although I don't like the idea of putting a parking lot in there instead, but moving the post office would be a good idea.
Okay,
Yeah, we also talked about moving the police station as well.
We did too.
into the other
Yeah.
district. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and the group I was in also talked about the opportunities that could be opened up by moving the public bathroom that's at the end of the town parking lot. Ben Robinson?
Yeah, thanks. I think what we need to encourage everybody to think about is growth in general, and how we can enhance what we already have, preserve what we already have, but move towards a more sort of steady state economy, and not look to growth to solve our problems. We know that growth is a major concern for the island at this point, given all the pressures that we have. But it's not just the island, it's the entire world that has to deal with this growth question. And so we shouldn't look to growth to being the solution, but how can we surgically and strategically enhance what we already have and preserve what we already have? I think that should be an overarching consideration in all these choices.
All right, Judith Miller. Judith, when you come back from the breakout rooms, unfortunately, everybody gets muted. So if you could unmute yourself, that'd be great.
Hello. I think that the bathrooms at the top of the parking lot are actually pretty well placed for convenience for tourists that are shopping and don't have any place to go.
All right.
But they could be beautified. The building could be beautified.
All right, great. It looks like Judith is off unmuted now.
I think the best part of what you've done for me is to give me some categories of decisions that I would have to make, what I would give priority to. And there's no doubt housing is a priority, but every one of your options does address that. But what you made me think about is a much bigger picture than just specifics. And that is that we have to decide as a town and as an island, whether we are going to use our time to improve the present situation without encouraging more growth, with a situation that we've understood since pandemic, that we've got too much of a population to support the present infrastructure. And so what I'm coming away with is I have certain priorities, which are not necessarily commercial, but I want a sense of a village. And I'm going to point more to downtown than I am going to point to State Road as a priority. I think that's a great idea, but what's the priority? I'm also going to put a point on arts and culture, because I'm wondering how much more economic stability we might get by making that a priority. But then I'm caught in saying, well, does that draw more and more people here? So I think, well, and then there's the the waterfront. To me, that is a priority. Saving that for economic reasons for long-term residents rather than just for tourists. So I'm sure you've done this as a group, but what you've made me think about is bigger categories. Where's my priority? State road and commerce, which has to do with being here full time. The economic abilities of growth that occur on the shoreline that are really more important to us as a community and the people who live here. And I thank you for doing that. But it's the big picture.
Thank you for that feedback. Connie?
Thank you. Yeah, I thought what Ben just said was really key to looking forward, is that we don't want to have unbridled growth. We want to have what is so often considered smart growth policies going forward, modified according to needs and restrictions. And I think that what we all need to keep in mind, that wastewater capabilities are wedded to housing in all of our business districts. And we need to understand that we have a sewer system that is, capable of what we have right now, and we're going to have an expansion going forward. But if we're going to go even further beyond what we already have approved at town meeting, that's going to be big dollars going forward. And so understanding that the consideration of adding a lot of mixed use development to the B2 or even back into the B1 or anywhere, it's going to have a wastewater component to that planning. And something else that came out of our breakout group was the desire, and I brought this up, the desire to draw visitors into downtown Vineyard Haven. The ferry schedule favors commuters at this point, not day trippers. And that's logistical reason. And so it's not only that Vineyard Haven isn't attractive, or that Vineyard Haven doesn't have good walkways, or Vineyard Haven doesn't have a good feel to it. It's just that the boats that favor day trippers don't so much come into Vineyard Haven. And so consider that going forward, that we have a great little town downtown, and I love it dearly, and I support it in my shopping habits. But if you want to see more day trippers come in, you're going to have to do something about the boat schedule.
Teresa?
Wow.
That's interesting. Hi, thank you. I'm in agreement with, smart growth, or, maintaining what is necessary for the community. I did want to thank you all for the additional pedestrian opportunities. Specifically, I'm focused on the waterfront. I love the idea of the extension being a public area for entertainment and so forth. Taking a lot of where we have more car focused and making it more pedestrian. I would say, if it's possible, to actually look at some of the proposed parking lots. If we could focus on, other means of getting around and encouraging less vehicles on the island, that would be something, including that parking lot that is proposed right at the Stop and Shop area. I think that would be a beautiful, common or some kind of just friendly place to welcome people to this location. And then the other thing is just the road surfaces. As we keep talking about flooding and issues about how to manage that, do we look at surfacing our roads differently? Thank you.
All right. H. Lee?
Hi, I agree with Mrs. Judy Miller and Ben too about who is this development and the growth for. And I just totally forgot to mention this. Our town revenue is coming from the 90% of the residential tax from the year-round and the seasonal property owners. and the 10% are coming from the 9 or 10% are coming from the commercial. And out of the residences, we cannot divide who is going to be around, or he said it's going to be 1,100 like exemptions. That means they are filing their taxes from the Vineyard Haven. So it could be at least more than 1,100 households. And also when we spend this money, and even though some are like events like a Beach Road Music Festival and all that, their money is allocated from the organizer, but the most of the work after visitors are gone or during the summer season, we have to spend our own real estate tax money to clear it. So that even though I like the visitors to visit the island because we should share, but we have to think about what is sustainable, what is not. Because then I start to think about the connector road, or any subway goes to the new area in the city, then the market price goes up, property price goes up, and who can afford to actually stay as a tenants or business owners? These are like a seasonal business owners. So we have to think about how to curb that so that we can have this year-round, the stores and the mixed use, actually this concept would work. So it has to be year-round operations. And then I think that should be really addressed where we can. And then also the people like the quaint Vineyard Haven town compared to the Edgar town, I'm sorry. And because they can actually glimpse into our humble and simple life too. So I think year round would actually attract more people come even after the summer season too. And I'm just selling that visitors' point of view. But I think we should only think about, without growing too drastically, too fast, what is actually best for us. And I think we should really ask, do you want to see the Edgar Town kind of the seasonal stores that are shut down with all the brown papers? Or do you want to see like some like a year-round, like a Bobby B Pizza or some other places, like Black Dog Tavern? And do you want to see that kind of a year-round business? How do you support it with the limited numbers when the population is plummeted down to the 1/8 or 1/10 in the 3 other seasons? So when I come to think about that, then we just don't have these buying powers to support all the stores. If it's not stores, what else should be in the business district? I think it's really the offices and the town people. And when I think about that, we should think about this rental. The rent, the price, that would spike up. And then how do you curb it? Because nobody can afford it. And even our bunch of grapes would be thrown out because of the high seasonal property prices too.
Thank you. That's a lot of complex parts there is to figure out. We're over our time, so it's 8:35. I guess, Morgan, you're going to be our last comment.
Well, I was just going to kind of piggyback with what I think Teresa said about trying to deprioritize cars. I made this comment in our small group that the challenge of the master plan is balancing the needs and challenges of today with trying to look into a crystal ball and predict what might be happening in the future. So I don't want us to focus all of our efforts on building stables for our horses only to have the Model T roll off the assembly line and then in the next 10 years they're all over the place kind of thing. Hard to predict what modes of transportation are going to be around 20 years from now, but I don't think we should marry ourselves to parking lots. I think we are seeing an increase in ride sharing. Obviously, our public transportation system on the island is very good as well. How do we prioritize that? Walkability, bikeability, all that good stuff. So that's all I've got. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all so much for coming tonight and your incredible thinking. Given us a lot to think about, and especially the idea of how to grow smartly or to not grow, and what the appropriate level of development is for Vineyard Haven and Tisbury. So thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.